Distinguished educational researcher Bob Stake has written a memoir reviewing his many publications in educational evaluation and research. This is a video review of that book entitled Measuring Education. Greetings, I'm Michael Quinn Patton, and I will host this review. Ruler underneath his name depicting measurement, and look closely on the left side of the book, you see an outline of Bob's face. Measuring Education is a collection of things that he's written, of excerpts of products that he's been a part of various kinds of publications over more than 6 decades of his experience as an educational evaluator and a professor at the University of Illinois. The book is organized chronologically from the 1960s to the present and takes us along that journey, both as what was happening in society, what was happening in education, what was happening in evaluation, and Bob's role and experience as a part of that important period of American history. Reading Bob's memoir brought to mind another memoir, that by the anthropologist Mary Catherine Bateson, the daughter of anthropologists Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson, who wrote about composing a further life, subtitled The Age of Active Wisdom. And Bob, now in his 90s, has certainly reached the age of active wisdom, and his memoir exudes the nature, scope, and significance of that wisdom. What I'm going to do is pull out a few excerpts to give you more of a wine tasting sense of what that's like, in the hope that you will delve into the book yourself to be able to experience the gems of wisdom throughout. Let me establish some of the hallmarks of Bob Stake's contributions to social science in general and evaluation in particular. His book on qualitative research is widely used because it delivers on the subtitle, tells you how to study how things work, studying how things work. Companion volume is The Art of Case Study Research, which shows how qualitative inquiry requires artistic and creative designs in order to do science and evaluation with quality and rigor. He wrote, by 1967, I had an inkling that we might need naturalistic case studies, their experientiality, dialogues, and context. I was taken aback when I first saw the title of Bob's memoir, Measuring Education, knowing the depth and importance of his qualitative work. I've always separated measurement as a quantitative word from qualitative inquiry, and told students and people I train in workshops to not use the word measurement with regard to qualitative evaluation. But Bob went the other direction. He decided to assert that qualitative inquiry, the description and depth of case studies that is the hallmark of qualitative inquiry, involves and manifests a kind of measurement. He wrote, psychometrics includes qualitative methods, particularly case study, but not seen as a refinement of quantitative methods. It is a grand embellishment, an important perspective, an important gem of wisdom. He also wrote, measuring things ought to be helping educators know the power, the futility, and the peace that passeth understanding of teaching and learning. It's a significant book on multiple case study analysis, which is an especially important challenge, looking across cases for important themes and patterns. He was editor of Advances in Program Evaluation that included major attention to qualitative inquiry and mixed methods. And he's been a specialist leading the way in how to evaluate an art program using case studies and qualitative inquiry. His work on responsive evaluation has become adopted worldwide as a way of engaging with the people around the evaluation to get the questions right, to understand the context and the complexities of the situation that the evaluation is going to be responding to. Let's begin with the beginning. Bob's position and work at the center at the University of Illinois, and hear from Bob himself.
And it's nice to have a chance to bring our Center for Evaluation. It's called the Instructional Research and Curriculum Evaluation Center here at the University of Illinois. We're old-timers around here. We got started in the 60s. And it was really about the beginning of educational program evaluation when we got started. And we did a bit of helping to get it started. The scene at the time was the curriculum development time, post-Sputnik, interest by lots of professors in seeing if they couldn't make the school curriculum better. And in order to get the support from the National Science Foundation, they needed to evaluate. We tried. We rolled out some of our best tests to see if we couldn't find what was good and what was bad about those new curriculum materials. And we had lots of trouble because the tests weren't sensitive to what the curriculum developers and other people wanted to know about the things they were developing. So gradually we crawled out of our past, the things that we knew how to do, and into a more ethnographic, a more responsive, a more personal kind of evaluation that looked at the experience, looks at the teaching, and looks at the context in order to try to decide what would be helpful to developers and other people with these new materials.
Let me pause to interject that this is clearly a promotional video that Bob did many years ago in support of the work at the center. But as always, he is brutally honest about what happened. Here's his personal reflective evaluation. In the memoir, he calls these reflections his midlife learning about program evaluation and writes, "My colleagues and I have become considerably wiser across a quarter century, but seldom soon enough to provide just what our clients wanted. Though trying hard, we usually failed to teach them. All too often, we patronized them. With roots in testing and instructional research, we regularly tried to introduce ideas and operations from outside education, often with humanistic consideration, but we failed to seriously engage the complexity and contextuality of educational practice." And so Bob Stake walks the talk of learning from failure by doing it ourselves, by going through that reflective process. He continues in the memoir on testing. Even within the first couple of years, we came to the conclusion that for program evaluation purposes, testing doesn't take us far. When our clients deeply understood education, they recognized that the tests on our shelves and in our catalogs did not deal effectively with their key objectives. Percentiles, yes. The predictive validities were fine, but the test did not assess what students have learned, what teachers had taught. He continues, "What we thought worth learning was seldom what our clients wanted. They bought our studies mostly because it satisfied an obligation for them to contract for evaluation." He continues, "We came to recognize it. Some of us did not quit in disgust. We continued to enjoy the work and the elevated station, sometimes rationalizing that someone had to do such work." And so as Bob reflects upon the new directions they attempted to take, the materials they developed, the alternatives to testing, and the failure to have those materials taken up. Here's what he says.
Now, you know, those materials didn't catch on, whether it was because they weren't well evaluated or not, probably something else. But we got some good experience in how one went about the business of formative evaluation, helping those who formed the curricula of the schools and the universities and the preschools and the nursing schools and other folks who have teaching as their responsibility.
Despite the disappointments of developing new materials and approaches that evaluation clients did not immediately appreciate or pick up, and yet finding ways to work with those open to improving teaching and learning helped avoid what he calls constant skepticism, the challenge of overcoming constant skepticism. He writes about that in the memoir in this way. He says, skeptical reviews are important for curiosity and inventiveness, and possible breakthroughs need to be encouraged. But he goes on, we should err on the side of enthusiasm. I think the human spirit requires it. And so what we find in the memoir is this honest assessment of the challenges of doing educational evaluation in ways that go beyond routinized, standardized testing, and avoiding skepticism by maintaining a focus on ways of improving. And that led to things that were learned. The lessons that become countenanced by Bob Stake. We're going to turn to these. One of the questions that he addresses in the memoir, which is intriguing, is, are any learnings essential? What is it that everyone should know? And is school the place to learn those things? Here's what he has to say about that. No specific learnings are essential. There is no one recipe for learning. As a matter of personal preference, anyone may declare some learnings critical. The answer is no. Success can be attained in many ways. This is in an article about beef stew. He asserts there is no one recipe for beef stew, no one recipe for success. But the question remains, does a person have to learn some specific things? And here's how he answers. The meaning of zero. This is important to learn. It may affect zero tolerance or zero discrimination or understanding numbers in general. He says there's a certain minimum numeracy that people need to understand. But what does a person really have to know? He says a person has to learn to read the word poison, or to feed oneself, or to pull out to the curb when lights behind are flashing, or to smile. These are his essential learnings. But these specifics are not dependent on the help of the school. And he concludes then, it is time to look after the quality of the beef stew. Our present mode of life, heterogeneous as it is, does not require a standardized scholastic preparation. It is not a time for task analysis and mastery learning. It is the time to look after the quality of the beef stew. There's a great deal to ponder in this metaphor of looking after the quality of the beef stew. There's no one way to make a beef stew, and there's no one secret to success, no one set of essentials that everyone must know. This cooking metaphor however, has broader applications because one of the things that Bob Stake made famous is the distinction between formative and summative evaluation based upon a cooking metaphor. Bob is widely cited as explaining the difference between formative and summative evaluation with the soup analogy. When a cook tastes the soup, that's formative. When the guests taste the soup, that is summative. You'll find on the internet lots of examples of this citation, which in some ways may be his most famous contribution to the evaluation literature because it is so widely cited. Here's a small sample. Evaluation's resident cartoonist, Chris Lisi, turned the distinction into a cartoon. The formative evaluation, chef tasting the soup, the summative evaluator, the guest tasting the soup, and developmental evaluation when the cook and the guest together prepare a soup for a special occasion. So now that we've got that distinction clear and know that Bob countenances making that distinction, let's turn back to the memoir to see what else Bob countenances. From the beginning of the memoir, he emphasizes not countenancing simplification, but countenancing multiple truths. He writes, "My measurements are not the first approximations to truth. They are choices I make as to how to clothe the truth." In countering simplification and keeping multiple truths alive, he quotes Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan to the effect that, quote, "The essence of tyranny is the denial of complexity," close quote. There is a purpose, then, Bob says, to my measurement. It is a purpose seldom recognized, seldom honored. I think measurements help counter that great onrush of what he calls the great simplification. He expressed that concern about the great simplification some 50 years ago, and he was certainly right about its onrush. We see it everywhere today. He said, quote, "I see measurements as vital to the world, not because they tell us what is truth, but because they keep other sides of truth alive." A long-standing commitment to multiple perspectives and dialogue. And he said about clothing the other side of truth, it is another case of the emperor's clothes, with the switch that it is the emperor who is invisible, and it is only the clothes that are seen. That one's worth pondering. There's a lot there. It's the switch that it is the emperor who is invisible, and it is only the clothes that are seen. Think about it. He does a great deal of pondering about truth, the nature of truth, multiple truths, significant and important and appropriate ruminations for an evaluator and an educational researcher. And he asks, if there is no enduring truth, is there no truth? The example he uses to illustrate consideration of this question is, what if A is not A? What does he mean by this? If A is not A, whether or not there is an A, transcending all notions of A, is not important. The important thing is to behold the many notions of A as we can best behold them. We cannot say that this and only this is A. A is living, growing, changing, splintering, splendoring, garland on garland. Repeating. A is living, growing, changing, splintering, splendoring, garland on garland. And this culminating thought, A, the eye of the fly, each eye of every fly. One of the things that emerged from Bob's experiences in working with diverse clients at the center was the importance of context. He writes in the memoir, "Most important, we feel we learned that anything worth being known by practitioners needs to be understood in context, that the generalizations honored in the social sciences and by policy researchers are of little help in the classroom or even the boardroom. Thus, the importance of treating case studies as unique and giving particularity rather than generalizability its due." He says, "We came to do case studies not for aesthetic, humanistic, or political reasons, but for epistemological reasons. They had meaning to the reader." Experience has special meaning for Bob phenomenologically. Learning from shared experiences, tapping into experience as a source of knowledge. He writes about experiential measurement for experiential learning. To provide opportunities for experience is the precious responsibility of the school. John Dewey, he notes, spoke repeatedly about our need for a philosophy of education based upon a philosophy of experience. Bob writes, quote, "I am sympathetic to this experiential conceptualization of schooling." Experiential knowledge, he writes, "We came to see that the important knowledge correction of classroom practice is experiential knowledge, and that the role of the evaluator can be to provide narrative accounts that provide vicarious experience." Bob's memoir shows that as he came to deeply countenance experiential knowledge, he came to not countenance psychometrics. He contrasted psychometrics with case study particularity. He writes, "Psychometrics officially belongs to individual psychology. Psychometrics is the measuring of individual intellects. But psychometric scaling and testing, I found out, are the technologies of grouping. In this applied science, we measured primarily to put people into groups, classes, ranks, tiers. We coddle rounding errors and flaunt classification. Psychometrics is a science of stereotyping." And particularity? One of a kind is a classification. A kind of one is a recognition of the mind-stretching uniqueness of each of us. Each of us, a kind of one. Each of us, a kind of one. This valuing of particularity, of the uniqueness of each person, undergirds and countenances his wisdom on teaching and learning. Enjoy. Now, with great enthusiasm, I get to review my favorite writing by Bob Stake. I've used it widely in my own speeches and publications, cited it broadly. It was published in 2004 in the American Journal of Evaluation, and it has the audacious and provocative title, "How Far Dare an Evaluator Go Towards Saving the World?" It opens the article with reflections on evaluators as a group of people and writes, "Professional evaluators come from many backgrounds. They have greatly different aspirations. As a group, they are considerate people. They are ethical. They follow disciplined procedures to find the merit and worth of a program or other object. Oh, there is a rogue here and there. He or she may go where the money is, but most of us evaluators are good people, most of the time." He goes on, "We are specialists at recognizing differences among greater and less quality. We hope that our work will contribute to the making of a better world. Most evaluators claim to make dispassionate searches for quality and dysfunction. They speak disdainfully of advocacy and promotion. Yet it is clear that most of us evaluators have strong feelings about certain matters which we promote in our work. It goes on that evaluators are complex human beings. Quote, each of us is more than an evaluator. We are complex human beings. Some of the panorama of advocacy cannot help but become part of the evaluation study, even if we try to confine it to the rest of our life. He shares what he has found evaluators care about. We care about the evaluand, the object being evaluated. Often we believe in it. We care about evaluation. We want to see others care about it. We advocate rationality. We would like our clients and other stakeholders, our colleagues and heads of departments, to explicate and be logical and even-handed. We care to be heard. We are troubled if our studies are not used. We are distressed by underprivilege. We see gaps among privileged patrons and managers and staff and underprivileged participants and communities. We aim some of the evaluation at studying issues of privilege, conceptualizing issues that might illuminate or alleviate underprivilege, and assuring distribution of findings to those most excluded. And we are advocates of a democratic society. We see democracies depending on the exchange of good information, which our studies can provide, but also we see democracies needing the exercise of public expression, dialogue, and collective action. Most evaluators try to create reports that stimulate action. That's a heady list and an insightful one. He goes on to affirm the ethical responsibility for the evaluator to identify the affiliations and ideological commitments that might influence his or her interpretations, not only for the contractors, but also for the readers of reports, and of course for the evaluator, her or himself. So what then are Bob Stake's ideological commitments? What does Bob Stake count on? He publishes in 1983 a statement of anarchists against evaluation that opens, the current infatuation with accountability in education is anchored in anti-person values. It is not the consumer protection it is billed to be, but rather an institutionalization of a system of subtle and not so subtle tyranny. Evaluators are the paladins of that power. And so anarchists against evaluation assert the accountability movement in education is unjust because performance standards are typically arbitrarily selected, performance measures used are highly imperfect, indirect indicators of actual conditions, measurables are largely trivial and minor aspects of settings, observables are ambiguous to persons transient to the settings, observations are based on intrusions into settings which change the setting itself, evaluators are selected without check on bias, values unexpressed are often critical to the content of evaluation reports, the hidden bias, the hidden basis for the operationalization of the evaluation. Time as a condition is often ignored by evaluators, and autonomy as a right of all parties studied is violated by normative review, evaluation. Now, therefore, we here assembled urge all like-minded colleagues to resist openly and covertly these dehumanizing efforts. Join us. Deny the claimed right to evaluate. Obfuscate real conditions. Attack persons, processes, and outcomes on all possible grounds. Demand representation of counter-evidence. Resist with whatever tactics possible as individual circumstances warrant. How far dare evaluators go toward changing not only the world, but toward changing evaluation? In the memoir, Bob writes, every effort to customize, to deal with the uniqueness of a human being, results in discrimination. We know no way to teach separately and equal, yet we know no way to do right and treat all the same. Together, we must be at our most ingenious selves to devise the meaning of equality, partly because it must mean special blessings for those who haven't invented the game. Neither tests nor heredities nor unfinished assignments justify privileging one child over another, one family over another, one race over another. It correspondingly supports diversity. Understanding is facilitated by diverse perspectives. Diversity is a catalyst to a healthy society. Notice the emphasis on diverse perspectives. Bringing people together of different backgrounds and different experiences doesn't necessarily mean diverse perspectives. So making the extra effort to include diverse perspectives about evaluation, about education, about whatever the issues are of the day, so that those diverse perspectives can be in dialogue with each other. He maintains a commitment that we ought to be engaged in research that manifests humanistic values, and that has to do with both how we are in the world and how our work contributes to the world. He says, if there is a humanism, and all humans have a duty to contribute to the integrity and preservation of that spirituality, then it befalls professional researchers to guide disciplined inquiry toward its support. It befalls professional researchers to use part of their inquiry for identifying opportunities to enhance the well-being of the human race. Are there any fields of research that are excused from this duty? Bob advocates that all evaluators and researchers ask what he calls the quintessential humanistic inquiry question. Is this a space in which a sense of justice and fairness and caring is to be found? He says, support humanism by raising this question in all inquiry spaces entered. A mere mention of the question will not assure a movement for justice, fairness, and caring, but engagement in the thought required by such questioning should motivate subsequent steps in fulfillment of that duty.